Hey, today we're talking about addiction. And if you're one that thinks you're addicted, whether it's addicted to drugs, alcohol, sex, work, people, or the internet, my message is a message of hope. Hi, I'm Dr. B, and I want you to fully enjoy life and experience the freedom that God desires for you and also those around you. Well, let's begin with defining what addiction is. Let me first cite Webster's dictionary, which describes addiction as exhibiting a compulsive, chronic, physiological, or psychological need for a habit forming substance, behavior, or activity. A person addicted is strongly inclined to do, use, or indulge in something repeatedly. Most major health experts agree that addiction is not a moral shortcoming or even a character weakness, but addiction is a treatable medical illness. Now, I'm going to say right up front, I'm not a medical professional, but I have helped many in counseling who suffer with addiction. So I'm going to approach the next few videos talking about addiction from a biblical counselor's perspective. Now, as I look back at all the people I've dealt with through counseling and my years of teaching and leading a program called Real Freedom, I feel addiction is something that can enslave your heart and control your soul, which is your mind, emotions, and will. But honestly, no one really sets out to become addicted. No one gets out of bed in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, I think I'm going to run my life, career, my family, and slowly trash and wreck my health. Let me give you a few examples. Not the stressed out pastor who is also a soccer coach that got hurt in a car accident and now is dependent on hydrocodone. Not the ICU nurse who's now taking pills from patients and drinking 2 bottles of wine a night while watching Hulu on her iPad just to fall asleep. Also, not the college student who needs a little help concentrating because they need to study at night. Not the missionary who is binging on porn every night and is thinking, this lust would leave if I could just serve God daily. They never got up thinking that. The examples are endless, but we now see millions upon millions that are truly addicted. What happens is those who have addictions deny it or disassociate from it. And we'll talk about that more in later videos. But right now, we're talking through an honest, open look at what addiction is and what it does. So let me try to share in a layman's terms how addictions can affect us. Addiction has a whole lot to do with brain chemistry. Our brains are wired to reward us when we do something that causes pleasure. There's a brain chemical called dopamine. This is a neurotransmitter that sends signals to the brain. We all need this chemical to have the right balances of physical, emotional, and mental responses. Dopamine brings us things like motivation and fulfillment, but the main thing it can bring is pleasure. Dopamine is often referred to as the happy hormone. Now, if I'm being totally honest and transparent, this is why I'm motivated to ride my bicycle every morning, because when I exercise, that also kicks the dopamine in. You've heard the expression runner's high. Well, that's endorphins being kicked in. Cardiovascular exercise is the best way to get the endorphins moving. This not only makes us feel good, but also encourages us to keep riding. Like I ride my bike because it has taught my brain to repeat behavior. Other ways we are rewarded by dopamine is, let's say, complete a task. It makes you feel good. Also, if your employer praises you on the job, you can receive a dopamine hit. In fact, there are certain foods that can cause a dopamine hit. It's also seen when falling in love, during sex, shopping, and actually when we enjoy certain activities. It can allow a release of dopamine. The key is this must be balanced. Also, serotonin can be released in our system. This is also called the happiness hormone. Serotonin is a chemical in our system that stabilizes our mood, gives us a feeling of well being and happiness. Serotonin is mainly produced in the gut and released in the bloodstream. So, exercise has also been known to promote the serotonin levels in your body. You can study that more online if you desire. Here's what happens with addiction, especially to drugs and alcohol. They trigger the same part of the brain, the reward system. Drugs like cocaine, opioids, and other drugs release lots of dopamine. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, explains that large surges of dopamine teach the brain to seek drugs at the expense of healthier goals and activities. Here's the big problem. There are some who are already at risk due to background, events, chemical makeup that causes the person to just focus on that high. Studies have proven that consistent drug use can severely limit the user's capacity to continue feeling pleasure. The reason is, over a period of time, drug use leads to lesser amounts of dopamine being released. What we see in counseling is that many who are focused on drugs struggle in their life and relationships due to the reward system in the brain releasing lesser amounts of dopamine. And again, here's the big problem, and you need to understand this. If you modify your brain by drug use, it requires more and more drugs just to perform in life at a regular, everyday level. I'm talking about the misuse of drugs. If you are working with a doctor that is prescribing, let's say, antidepressant medication and monitoring you, that's understood. I do want you to understand this. Many of the treatments for addictions today are highly effective. It just takes the person being treated to admit they are dependent. If you are one that is admitting and ready to get released from this cycle, I can recommend some great therapists that have awesome results. Studies have proven that drug addiction can actually change the areas of the brain that we use for memory, behavior, making decisions, and day-to-day judgments. This is where we can see the destructive behavior and compulsive behavior seen in addicts. Now, next session, I will dive into helping you determine if you are addicted or not. Things like a person who is outgoing and happy. The life of the party is now one that does not want to get out of bed, caused by drug use. Someone who you trust now is lying and even stealing to keep their drug habit going. This leads to my next point about what is addiction. Well, addiction can actually produce cravings, which can change behavior. You know, as a counselor and pastor, I've sat across from many people who deal with the consequences of their addiction. And what I try to get them to understand is we are emotional and spiritual beings. God's desire is for us to live at harmony with Him and with others, especially ourselves. And I do feel the enemy will use addiction to keep us from serving God and having great relationships with those around us. So I do approach overcoming addiction with a biblical direction, and also I know that God uses great therapists and programs to help people overcome their addicted way of life. Addiction is not only physical and psychological, but emotional and spiritual. The reason addiction is a spiritual issue is because it affects our connection with God, our Heavenly Father. For many, instead of allowing our relationship with God to help, we rely on our own will and thinking. In addiction, we have the tendency to harden our hearts and do not allow how God made us to live and feel. So we end up using mood-altering substances and even behaviors to take care of the void we feel in life. Now, by doing these things, we are putting our trust in self instead of God. I think this is what the Apostle Paul is referring to as we read Ephesians 4:17 through 19. Here's what Paul said. So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They're darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they've given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. Let me challenge you to turn your attention toward God. You will not find full life without God in it. I also encourage you to follow my series on addiction. The next video, I will try to answer the question, am I addicted? Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If it was helpful to you, be sure to hit the thumbs up button. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you can always know when we post new content. Have a wonderful day as you continue finding freedom in your life.